This is a recording of Burt E. Green of 335 Bent Creek Lane, Ormond Beach, Florida, 32074. Burt's phone number is area code 904-673-4510. The recording was made on January 3rd, 1989 by Jim Walkinshaw of the Oldsmobile History Center at Burt's home in Ormond Beach, Florida. This is tape number 1 of 2 tapes. Okay, Burt, if you would just kind of start with your name, address, and phone number, please.
My name is Burt Green. I live at 335 Bent Creek Lane, Ormond Beach, Florida. Zip code 32074.
And what's your phone number?
And phone number is area code 904-673-4510.
Great.
I'm having a problem talking because I'm missing 3 teeth.
No, that's okay. It sounds great. It sounds great.
I went to the dentist the first thing this morning. I got problems. Got to go back again tomorrow morning.
Oh, goodness.
But
Just start us back when you started.
Well, when I first started with Oldsmobile, I knew I wanted to be in wholesale because my dad was a Chevrolet dealer in a small town just outside of Cincinnati.
Okay.
And the business wasn't large enough for he and I both, and so when I got out of school, we agreed to disagree. So I knew I wanted to stay in the automobile business, and at that time in 1940, it seemed to me like the best way to go was wholesale. I knew I didn't want to work for Chevrolet because they had such a turnover, but I thought, well, why don't I try Buick, Olds, or Pontiac? So I went into Cincinnati this day, and Buick, Olds, and Pontiac were all three in the same building.
Oh, okay.
So, but Oldsmobile was on the 4th floor, Pontiac on the 5th, and Buick on the 7th. The elevator came to the 4th floor first, so I stopped at Oldsmobile. And I'll never forget it because Jim Berry was the zone manager and Joe Folsom was the assistant zone manager. And I walked in and told him what I was looking for a job. I wanted to work in wholesale, automobile business. And Jim Berry, the zone manager, was not in, but Joe Folsom, the assistant zone manager, was in. So he started talking to me, and I could tell when he was talking to me he was becoming somewhat interested in my background, going to school and working for my dad as an automobile dealer. At the time I was in the Idaho Grasshopper. And I found out later that they had received approval that day to hire an assistant office manager car distributor.
Well timed.
So the timing couldn't have been any better. I never got the Buick or the Pontiac. I stopped right there. And so they said, well, how soon can you come to work? And I said, tomorrow. They said, well, we can't start you tomorrow, but how about coming in Monday? And I think this was on Tuesday. I said, I'll be here.
Oh, that is beautiful. That is really something.
So the timing was perfect for me, and till the day I retired in 1980, I can say I never regretted the day of it.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah, I really enjoyed my 40 years and 4 months. Because it was on April the 10th was the day I started, and I retired on June the 1st.
Isn't that something?
In 1980, but it was. I had a lot of experiences there.
What did they put you to work doing?
They couldn't give me the title of assistant office manager car distributor because they didn't have that kind of a job at that time. So they called me a mail clerk.
Okay.
But I was assistant office manager car distributor.
Okay.
And so I knew nothing at all about the wholesale end of the business. Absolutely nothing. But we had a girl there that took me under her wing. Her name was Mary. I'll never forget her. She was the best tutor I think that anybody could ever have. It so happened that the car distributor we had, his name was Fred Poole. He was an older man. I thought at that time he was probably in his late 40s, and I thought that was an old man. Anyway, he wasn't very good.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew this is what I wanted to do. So 10-day report at that time was, you did it all by hand. You got the information in from the dealers, computers you never heard of. You never heard of a stamp machine. You hand stamped them by licking them.
Isn't that something? Okay.
I had worked about, probably 2 months. At that time, we had to, on our sending car orders to Lansing, we had what we called a preference. And so on this preference, which meant that you got the orders from the dealers, and then you wrote them up 4 to a carload, and then you sent the orders to Lansing. You did this on Friday. Well, it was a long, drawn-out procedure, and anybody who ever went through it knows what the hell I'm talking about, but I'm sure a lot of people today would have no idea,
Won't have the biggest
wouldn't have the faintest idea, because it was a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
In 1940, I don't know whether a lot of people remember or not, but the cars weren't selling themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we had 6 district managers. One headquartered in Huntington, West Virginia, one headquartered in Lexington, Kentucky, one in Cincinnati, one in Charleston, West Virginia, and one in Lexington, Ohio. And what we would do on Friday at noon, we would have all of these, we'd know where each one of these district managers were, and about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we would get a call from Lansing telling us what car orders we were to submit that day, or that night.
Mm-hmm.
So, this one, I've been working about 2 months, and so the orders had to be in the mail on by Saturday morning. But Friday night, after we completed the ordering procedure and a write-up of all the orders, why then we would have to send a telegram. So we'd go over to Western Union, and usually it was about 1:30 or 2 o'clock on Saturday morning when we would go over to Western Union and send a wire telling me exactly the number of car orders we sent in by series, by trim, and by color. And that had to be done. And at the same time, we had to take the orders and put them in the post office so they would get out on Saturday to go to Lansing, so they would have them on Monday morning. Well, we never got through before 1 or 1:30 on Saturday morning. And incidentally, no one ever heard of any overtime.
Yeah.
No overtime. You never thought of anything like that. Never even entered your mind.
How many people did it take to kind of do that?
The car distributor and myself,
Two
two people.
Mm-hmm. For a whole zone.
For the whole zone. And Cincinnati zone at that time was extended from down in Galax, Virginia, went as far north as about 30 miles beyond Dayton,
Mm-hmm.
Salina, Ohio. And east and west, it went from the Ohio line, took in what was the Indianapolis zone over into Indiana,
Mm-hmm.
Indianapolis and all Anderson, all those that area. So it wasn't only a large geographic area, but it was large. We had over 250 dealers.
Yeah.
And so,
How many cars would a typical week's worth be, sort of?
about 300,
300?
maybe two, depending upon the time of the
Yeah.
year. It would vary from, I would guess remembering that the low number of a week when they were in production,
Mm-hmm.
with more than model changeover, would be like, the low point would probably be 100,
Mm-hmm.
and the high point would be about 325.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're writing those up,
All longhand.
all longhand,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd have to, if you wanted to preference 4 cars, then you would have to put 4 cars
Together.
together, geographically together.
Mm-hmm.
That's the right word.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this one night, and I'll never forget it. I don't remember the night particularly because they're all alike, but I sure remember the next week. Monday about noon, the telephone rings from Lansing, and Nolan Walker was working in car distribution there in Lansing at the time. Where in the hell is your goddamn preference? Where's your cars? Well, didn't show. He said, well, you're going to have to redo it.
Oh, no.
And, of course, we had only thing we had were copies.
Yeah.
And all we had at that time, because was a paper copy of the car order,
Mhm.
which meant we would have to write up some 300 orders, physically write them up, as well as do all this other work besides. He said, we'll give you till tomorrow morning for them to get here. I said, well, they were put in the mail. Well, when the mail came on Tuesday morning, the envelope came back because I didn't put any stamps on it. Well, I thought this was a short career.
Embarrassed.
And not only embarrassed, but I was still on probation. I mean, I had only been there a couple of months. I'll never forget Joe Folsom, the assistant zone manager. He was so nice. He said, Burt, he says, everybody has made a mistake. He said, just don't make the same mistake twice.
Well, at least he understood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He understood, and he knew that no one felt any worse than I did.
Yeah.
And I did. I felt bad because, oh my God, the amount of work that was not only involved, but also the black eye we had in the Cincinnati zone. There's one other thing I'd like to say, too. When I first started, and the first day of work, Jim Barry talked to me. He said, he was the zone manager, and he said, he said, Burt, he says, I've been around, he said, now for about 15 years. He says, I'm the zone manager. And he said, we only have 3 or 4 rules. He said, and if you follow those, he said, you'll get along all right. He said, number 1, he said, we're in business to sell cars, parts, and accessories. And he says, we collect for them. We don't give any credit. And he says, if a dealer's parts account is past due, or coming past due, he says that dealer's supposed to pay for them on the 10th of the month, and by the 8th of the month we don't have his check in here, we go get it.
Oh.
And we did. And if we had these 250 dealers spread across this whole geographic area, and if a district manager part check from his dealer wasn't in by the 8th of the month, my God, we got him on the phone, in regards to where he was in his district, he went and got the check.
No kidding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
That was without fail.
Uh-huh.
And as a consequence, we never had any past due parts accounts.
That's interesting. That's an interesting approach. Was that unique, or did each
Each zone manager did the same thing.
Did it?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And he said, another rule we have, you never borrow money from a dealer or put yourself in a position where you're under any obligation to that dealer. And he said the third thing is, he says, integrity is the most important thing you've got. Be honest. If you make a mistake, admit it. He says, because you're going to make them. He says, admit it, and don't try to lie out of it. And he says, and there is a fourth thing. He says, you never get your meat where you get your potatoes.
Good philosophy.
And I'll never forget those 4 rules he had, and I abided by them 100%.
Yeah.
And far as I know, I enjoyed following those rules because I think it's a good philosophy for anybody.
I do too. Sounds great.
If everybody followed that, we wouldn't have all the problems we got today.
You bet.
In a lot of areas,
Yes.
not only in business but also in government.
Yes. Yes. And in personal relationships.
Absolutely.
Too.
So that's how I started, and that's how I ended too.
Mm-hmm.
Doing those. You never put yourself in a position of where a dealer is doing something for you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget that right after the war, when cars were really hard to come by in 46, I went back to the Cincinnati office and was assistant car distributor again. And we had a dealer in Maysville, Kentucky. And the dealers at that time, in 1947, would do just about anything to get another automobile, because it meant another $1,000 in their pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And $1,000 at that time was one hell of a lot of money. And he called me up and he said, Burt, he said, I really need a couple of cars. And at that time, that day, we happened to have 3 cars in the warehouse. And he was really pleading. And I said, well, I can't give you 3, but maybe. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. You give me 2 cars, and he said, it's worth a case of whiskey to you. I said, Joe, you just blew it. Because I said, you offered me a bribe, and I don't take any bribe. And anytime I sell my soul for a case of whiskey, if I sell my soul, it's going to be for one hell of a lot more than a case of whiskey. It isn't going to be for that. He says, you just blew it. And I said, don't you ever call me and ask me for another car again. And I meant it.
Mm-hmm. And he didn't.
And he never did again.
Mm-hmm.
He never offered me anything again.
Mm-hmm.
I have accepted at Christmas time from dealers. I have accepted a bottle of whiskey. I have accepted a box of candy, but never of anything of any value. Yeah. And a lot of people in Oldsmobile can't say the same thing. I know that.
True.
But that was my philosophy, and because of what Jim Barry told me when I started, and I believed it, and I still believe it. I believe you're better off.
Sure.
And I have accepted a golf game, greens fees, or things like that, but never anything of any lasting value. I guess my philosophy was if you can drink it or smoke it or eat it in 24 hours,
Right.
it's okay.
Yeah. That was kind of the same thing we used out in manufacturing.
Was it?
Yeah. I'm not sure everybody did that, but that
Yeah.
was the philosophy.
Well, I know a lot of people in the sales department didn't do it,
Yeah.
but I did. Anyway, I really enjoyed all of my working life with Oldsmobile. Went from assistant car distributor in Cincinnati to office manager car distributor in Detroit
When was that?
in 1948.
What'd you do during the war?
But during the war, I forgot to tell you, I got fired on December the 20th, 1941.
Holy Pete, right after Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, they laid me off. They said I was laid off. I said I got fired because I wasn't getting paid.
Yeah, right. What, they just kind of chopped staff? Is that what they were doing?
That's what they did. They just, absolutely. They called the zone manager and assistant zone manager into Lansing from all over the country and told them what their staff was going to be.
Okay.
We had 6 district managers. We ended up with 2.
Oh my goodness.
We ended up with a zone manager and an assistant zone manager and the car distributor, and that was the entire office for us, and they had 3 girls out of 6. We had 6 girls, and they cut it to 3. And no assistant car distributor, which was my job.
Yeah.
There is one other interesting thing. About 3 months before that happened, a man by the name of Sandberg, who was the budget manager in Lansing, came down and just looking around, and he saw what work I was doing, and I was still classified as a mail clerk. And he said, well, you're not working in the mail room. I said, well, I do, but not very often. And so he went back to Lansing and changed my classification to assistant office manager car distributor from a mail clerk. And with that went a raise of $5 a month.
Which was a lot of money.
It was to me.
Yeah.
It bought me a couple more pork chops.
Do you remember what you hired in that?
Yes, $125 a month. And I got the raise to $130 a month, and I was very happy. I wasn't happy, but we were getting along. All right.
Well, then during the war, then you were just out of the auto industry?
Yeah, I went to Cincinnati Milling Machine as a timekeeper, which I absolutely hated.
Okay.
And then I got a job as senior clerk at the Air Service Command in Dayton, and just outside of Dayton there at Fairfield, Ohio.
Yeah.
And from there, I got my greetings from the president. And before my induction date, though, I went down and enlisted.
Oh. Yeah.
And so I had to go back to Cincinnati to enlist. And then, with my enlistment, I was able, and because I did enlist instead of being drafted, I went right back to the Air Service Command doing exactly the same thing I was doing before.
Only as a military person.
Only as a buck-ass private. And I stayed there until the rumors got pretty persistent. We were going to be shipped out of there, and we were going to join the war effort. So I then volunteered for the Air Transport Command, which was the branch of the service that did all the flying overseas and in the States. That was the airline. That was the airlines for the Army.
Moving the people and the material.
People and material. Air Transport Command. And so I went to work then as a corporal for them. And then I went out to Hamilton Field in California, which is in the San Francisco area, and was there for 3 months schooling. And I came back and was supposed to be at LaGuardia the rest of the war. Well, somebody got the idea that about 8 of us who come out of Hamilton Field would be good to go to Naples. So we went to Naples, and we flew then out of Naples until after the war in Europe was over, and then we went up to Rome until I came home. We were flying out of Rome, and we flew to all over the Karachi, Abadan, Persian Gulf, Agra in India, Calcutta, Bombay, Athens. We flew up into London, Paris, Germany. That whole area we would fly into with either personnel or people or both on the plane. Cairo, you name any city, a major city in Europe or Asia, and I've been there. I never got over the hump, though. We just went as far east as Calcutta, as far east as we went. And I would spend probably 15% or 20% of my time in either Naples or Rome. The rest of the time I was flying all over that area.
When did you come back to the plant then?
I came back, I got discharged on March the 10th, 1946. And I went back to work on 1st of April in the Cincinnati office, 1947.
Did you have to do anything special? You told them you were coming out and they restarted?
I came out, then they had to get approval to put me back on. First day, on March the 11th, I went into the Cincinnati zone office. I was discharged at Camp Atterbury in Indiana.
See, were we making cars at that point in time?
Yes, yeah, oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I was discharged at Camp Atterbury, and it was on a Sunday, and on Monday morning I was in the Cincinnati office telling them I'm available, I want to go back to work. And at that time there was a question as to whether or not my continuous service date would go back to April the 10th, 1940, or whether it would be start all over. It took them about a year to resolve that. It was finally resolved in my favor. So I did get credit as far as my length of service date with General Motors is concerned, back to April 1940. But I didn't work from December the 31st, 1941 until April the 1st, 1946.
See, when you left in 41, had they shut off the plant yet, or was the plant still making cars?
No, they were not making cars.
They were down.
They quit making cars, and the plant was down, and the freeze was on,
Yeah. Okay.
and all the cars that the dealers had were frozen. And
Did we hold all those cars? What did we do with that?
the dealers held it. They were dealer stock. The dealers owned it, but the dealers couldn't sell them until they got a release for you as an individual. If you got a permit, just saying that you could buy an automobile,
Okay.
then you could go to any dealer you wanted to who had a car, but you had to have that permit to be able to buy it from the dealer.
So that's how they held them back, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah, oh yeah. And some of the dealers didn't want to stay in business, and some dealers were very enthusiastic, like Columbia Oldsmobile in Cincinnati. He went out and he bought about 400 automobiles across the country, Oldsmobiles across the country, and shipped them into Cincinnati, and he made one hell of a lot of money off of those cars.
So we did lose some, however, that decided to kind of
Dealers,
quit.
oh yes, yes, oh, we lost a lot of dealers.
Because there really wasn't much they could do then during the war except fix cars.
All they could do was fix cars or sell parts or accessories. Parts mostly.
We
no
weren't
accessories.
limited on parts, is that?
No, we were not,
We
no.
could make and sell those,
Oh,
so
yeah.
to speak.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And so,
Well, when you got out then, Burt, and we were in 45,
I got out in 46.
or excuse me, 46,
Yeah.
cars must have been selling just as fast as you could shove them out the door.
Waiting lists. I mean, waiting lists and premiums. A lot of dealers made fortunes on overcharges or under the table, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, they're valuable.
Yeah. So someplace in there we had a big old strike, didn't we? Isn't that where we had that big long 90 or 120 day strike right after the war?
Yeah,
Might have been 47 or 48, I don't know when it was.
47 it was. The real big strike though was back in 37.
When the sit-down strike.
Yeah, yeah, that was the big one.
Yeah.
But this one, yeah, it lasted, I don't remember how long it lasted. It was a long time though.
Yeah.
But it was, so from there I went to Detroit.
Okay.
I was assistant, I was office manager car distributor in Detroit. And then from there I went to Lansing as assistant organization analysis manager.
Was that a normal progression, or was that a little unusual?
Well, I guess looking back at it, it was unusual to go from there into the home office, into that type of a job.
Yeah.
It was an entirely different type of a job than what I'd had in the field. And then about 6 months after I was there, the fellow who was the organization analysis manager, he went south, and so they made me the organization analysis manager.
Who was that?
Howard Ellis.
Howard Ellis. What kind of a guy was Howard Ellis?
Very smart and very capable, but the guy who was his supervisor, Lee Johnson, was a son of a bitch.
Huh.
And Helen remembers him very well too, because she
Probably
worked
will.
for him.
Yeah.
Because Helen worked for me at that time. She was my secretary.
What was wrong with, what did he do that made that?
Yeah. Well, in the first place, he was an alcoholic.
Oh, okay.
And he would call this guy up at home and just chew him out something awful, not show up for work the next day and all that crap. I mean, it was a typical alkaline, and Howard just had all he could take.
Did that funnel on down to you guys?
No.
It did.
Well, it didn't. It never affected me.
Yeah, it never got through. He was a pretty good screen, so to
Yes,
speak.
yeah. And so we survived it, and then
Now, when he left, And he went to Texas, you said?
Yeah, he went to Texas
And
as a
you took-
district manager.
And you took over his job.
Yeah.
And then who were you working for then? Still,
They brought in a guy, his name was Sandberg, Sandberg,
okay.
and he was in the accounting department.
Oh, he was?
Yes.
Well, that's interesting.
And he went into that job then
Mm-hmm.
for about 6 months, and they made me the manager.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And he went back to the accounting department.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyway, he was there for 6 months
Yeah.
and went back to accounting.
Yeah.
And he was
And then he died shortly thereafter.
okay.
Yeah. And so then they made me the manager of the department.
And what did you have to do then in that department?
We handled all the dealer organization papers from all 26 zones we had. We handled all the reporting of sales for Oldsmobile. We handled the recontracting of dealers. We handled, I guess those are the main things we handled.
Okay.
But the sales, it was a lot different than it was today. It was all manual.
Yes.
Recapitulation of it was all manual. Recap of it was all manual.
Was that a lot of calling people and bugging people for numbers and that
No,
sort of thing?
no. It was automatic. They said dealers would send the information into the zones. The zones would compile the figures, and the zones in turn would send them into us.
Okay. So actually the zone guys had to be the guys that were badgering the dealers.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's one of the things that you do in the zone office.
Mhm.
Just one of the many things.
Is that a traditionally, or was that kind of a task that the dealers for some reason didn't like to send in numbers?
They didn't like to send in correct numbers a lot of times. If they had too many cars, they would say they had more than they had.
No.
If they wanted more cars, they'd say they didn't have any.
Play a little game.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was always a game
Uh-huh.
to determine what the truth was.
Will the real numbers stand up?
Yeah. And a car shortage, well,
Yeah.
they would really give you the business. They'd do anything to get more cars, and the car shortage and the overage you couldn't.
Yeah.
The other way.
The opposite way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that mean that would the sales figures in those years be subject to perhaps some error because of that? Do you think?
Yes. I would say they were never more than 95% accurate.
Uh-huh.
But they were close.
Yeah.
It gave you a strong indication of what was going on.
We did sell everything we made eventually,
Oh yes, yeah,
unless it got smashed or broke or something.
yeah. We never ground on up and ate them for breakfast
Yeah,
yet.
right.
Never have, and
Yeah.
I hope we never do.
Yeah.
But it was,
Okay.
so I was there from 1948, fall of 48, to the spring of 53.
Okay.
And then I went to Cleveland as assistant zone manager, and was there for not quite a year and a half. And then I went to Atlanta as assistant zone manager.
Were those zones significantly different other than
Geography?
Other than geography?
No.
The operations were the same?
Operations, one zone to another zone were practically the same all over the country. You didn't have any real, you had different ways of doing things, maybe, but the end result was all the same. I mean, this guy might put this paper here, and the other guy put it here, or something like that, but nothing.
But you all filed the same kind of reports
Right,
and the same
yes,
kind of
yes,
papers?
yes. The same reports went into Lansing
Mhm.
from all the zones.
Mhm.
They still do.
Mhm.
That part of it hadn't changed. As far as what you do, it's just,
Yeah.
I think it is a lot closer to being the same today than what it was then.
Okay. Did people come back together in Lansing every so often or not?
Only zone managers.
Only the zone manager?
They would have a meeting probably 3 or 4 times a year in Lansing.
Mhm. Would the zone managers try and draw the dealers together in any way, shape,
Oh
or
yeah,
form?
we had meetings on meetings on meetings.
Okay.
Either have an entire zone meeting, or we would have district meetings with just the dealers in the district.
And what would the purposes of those have been?
Generate sales,
Okay. Pep talk.
enthusiasm.
Uh-huh. So you would have literature and movies, or
We have movies as you, if you could consider movies today.
Yeah.
But yes, we had movies, we had records. There's one funny story, or not funny really, it wasn't funny at the time, but we had an assistant sales manager in Lansing by the name of Ralph Myers. And the Cincinnati zone wasn't doing too good on selling an item, which was a must item, according to Lansing, every dealer had to buy. We had a lot of those kind of things, but this one item was an item where you had to plug it in, and then it was a recording on a record, which was a sales message to the dealership from the general sales manager or general manager of Oldsmobile.
Mm-hmm.
And the machine, as I remember, it probably cost in the area of $75 or $80.
Mm-hmm.
But $75 or $80 at that time was a lot of money. And so Cincinnati zone wasn't doing very good on selling its quota. You had a quota for everything. They didn't say it was a quota, it was an objective. If you didn't sell your objective,
They got after you.
Yeah. And anyway, Ralph Myers came down to show us how to sell them. So Jim Barry loads him in the car. He goes down into Kentucky with him. They pull in at this place, and Jim says, "This is one of the places, Ralph, we haven't been able to sell." Ralph says, "We'll handle it." He gets his sample out of the car and carries it in, starts talking to the dealer, and he says, "Well, I want to plug this machine in." He says, "Where can I plug it in?" And the dealer says, "What do you mean plug it in?"
No juice?
No electricity in the goddamn dealership.
I can't believe it.
Ralph says, "Well," he says, "I think I'll go back to Lansing."
That was the end of that.
Yeah. This Ralph Myers, though, he was quite a guy. I'm sure Helen will remember him. He was assistant sales manager, and he had originally come from Chevrolet. And he was a taskmaster. Good. He came down to one of our, we used to have a zone meeting where we called the district managers and the service managers in the Cincinnati maybe once every 6 weeks or 2 months for a meeting, another pep meeting.
Yeah.
Get them recharged and everything, go over their problems and so forth. So the Netherland Plaza Hotel in Cincinnati, which is still there, I think it's called a Sheraton now. Anyway, our office is only a block away from there. And whenever the fellas came in from off the road, that's where we always put them up there. So Ralph told Jim Barry, he says, "Jim, tomorrow morning," he says, "I'd like to have a group breakfast with the guys before we have our meeting." Jim says, "Fine." So we arranged for this group breakfast. Everybody came down. Of course, the night before on any zone meeting like that, the guys always had a kitchen convention. They got everything all straightened out before you ever went to the meeting.
Sure.
Besides that, they had a lot of booze.
Right.
Well, that morning, everybody came down. They were bleary-eyed, hungover, and these eggs looking up at them. Nobody wanted anything at all to eat. Finally, Ralph said to me, he says, "Well, you might as well eat that one because you're going to get another one just like it," because he says, "I've looked at your expense reports and that's how much money you've been putting down for breakfast."
Oh, my goodness.
You talk about some sick guys. They were sick.
Oh, good.
Oh, man.
Oh, gracious sakes.
We had another guy. Thought he was a great Romeo. And he was headquartered in Lexington, Kentucky. We never could find him. because we were always wanting to find the district manager. They were supposed to tell us where they were. So if we wanted to get a hold of them, had to get a hold of them, we could by phone. And you never knew when you had to get a hold of them. But we had a hard time keeping track of this guy. His name was Ellie Ross. We called him Ellie. His name was Elliot. We called him Ellie. And Jim Barry told him, he says, Ellie, if I catch you in Cincinnati again without me knowing about it or coming in here for a meeting, he said, I'm going to fire you.
Mm-hmm.
And that day, his own manager could fire somebody.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have to get approval from Lansing or anything. You just tell him to bring in your briefcase and you're fired. So Ellie goes along. He does a pretty good job. He was coming back to Cincinnati. He was hiding it. He was banging some nurse up there.
Caught.
And so Jim caught him.
Mm-hmm.
He said, if you ever come back here again, he said, I'm going to fire you. Went along pretty good for about 2 months. No problems. And then a guy comes in the office one day who lives over in Kentucky. And he says, a fellow 10 days ago ran into me. I was coming down the hill into Cincinnati from Covington, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And it was foggy. It was late at night. And he says, I got his license number, but a false name, because this car is registered to Oldsmobile. Well, sure enough, it was Ellie's car.
Mm-hmm.
He had been up to Cincinnati, and this hospital was a hospital at St. Francis over in Covington, Kentucky. And they had been to this nightclub over in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And it was foggy, and he was following this tail light. He followed him right off the highway and banged into him off the highway. So we had him dead to rights.
Yeah, he was caught. Oh, boy.
So Jim Barry got a hold of him.
Yeah.
He said, bring in your briefcase, Ellie. He said, what happened? He said, well, you were in Cincinnati a couple of weeks ago and ran into a guy. He said, that's it.
And that was it.
It was it.
Mm-hmm.
He just set the separation papers into Lansing, and that was all.
Yeah.
You didn't have to have any approval of any personnel
Yeah.
department or God
Yeah.
to fire somebody. You just
Yeah.
did it.
Yeah. And people didn't have any real recourse. I mean, there wasn't
There
a
was
lot
no
of hassle or...
there was no court system or nothing,
Yeah.
and nobody
Yeah.
could sue you or nothing
yeah,
else.
like they
Nah.
fool around with it.
Uh-uh. Nothing like you got today.
Yeah.
It was easy doing business.
Sure.
Of course, today, you can't fire somebody because of the way they part their hair either.
No,
And you don't
right.
like the way they
Yeah.
part their hair.
Or the color of their skin, or all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, right,
So I guess today is better.
right.
But at least you had more, put it this way, a zone manager at that time had more leeway to run his zone
Right.
than what you have today.
The way he wanted to.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the way it should be run. Today, you've got to get approval of every goddamn thing you do.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't think that the general manager of Oldsmobile, so-called, has any more real authority
Mm-hmm.
than what I had when I was assistant car distributor.
I think that's probably true.
I really believe
because
that.
of all this approval process that you have to go
The
through.
approval process is just so drawn out and so complicated, and it's all done by machines.
Mm-hmm. Paperwork is just horrendous.
And instead of quitting paperwork, all they do is generate paper. And I've said for a long time, they may say they're saving money, but my God, it doesn't seem like it to me. When you see these reams of paper come out, and nobody ever looks at this stuff after you crank it out.
Yeah, the computer is excellent at doing that.
Nobody ever looks at the goddamn thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it's a lot worse today than it was when I quit.
Oh, it is, yeah.
It's got to be.
Very, yeah.
They've had 8 years to improve
Yeah,
on it.
yeah.
8.5 years now.
Okay, so now you were down in the zone in Texas? Atlanta, excuse me, Georgia.
Yeah.
Okay.
So from there I went to Buffalo, December the 1st, 1955, as zone manager in Buffalo.
Okay.
And then I was there until March of '59, when I went back to Lansing. So that was my second tour of duty in Lansing when I went back there, and I stayed in Lansing until I retired.
Okay. What did you come back to Lansing?
As the director of office management and budget for the sales department.
Okay.
That encompassed everything that nobody else wanted to do. Had indirect supervision of the office management part of the zones, as well as Lansing. The entire budget process for the sales department.
Okay.
And
Is that the manpower budget side, or is that the advertising side too, or all of that?
all of it.
All of that.
Yeah. Every dollar the sales department had, I was the one who oversaw the preparation of the budgets for it and the compliance with the budget figures, staying within the budget. And indirect supervision of the zones in that area too.
When did you get in at 58, did you say?
No, 59.
59.
March of 59.
Okay. How did that process change in that period of time that you were there? Any at all?
Yeah. I'm going to put something on the tape now that you won't like.
Oh, that's okay. Unless you don't want.
No. I started to say before, I really enjoyed my job probably until the last 4 years I worked.
All right.
And the reason I didn't enjoy it after that was because of the niggers and the goddamn women.
Huh. Okay.
Forcing us to take women into jobs that they're not qualified for, weren't prepared to do, not qualified for, and taking the blacks who were not qualified under any circumstances to do the jobs that they were supposed to be doing. You'd have to hire two people to do the work of the one person because they weren't qualified.
Yeah.
I'll give you one instance. We hired a black out of the University, Western Michigan, had an MBA in marketing. That guy could not tell you what 10% of 100 was, or 2% of 10. Absolutely foreign to him.
You wonder how he got through all those years of school.
Easy. He was black. That's the only way he got through.
Bad news.
It was. And from then on, I really didn't enjoy what I was doing because I was deeply involved in that, in seeing, I knew what everybody in the sales department made, except the sales manager.
Yeah.
And seeing what these people were being paid for what they were doing and not knowing anything. Not only the blacks, but the women too. I mean, we put out district managers, calling them district manager, giving them the title of a district manager and a company car and expense account. They didn't know shit from Shinola. And they still don't. We've only, in the time that I worked, until I retired, we only had one girl who knew anything, and she came out of New York, and she's still working, Kathy Ryan. She's the only one. But we had to have...
Yep, quotas, again.
Yeah, absolutely. They never said it was quotas, just an objective.
Yeah, it's an objective, right.
So I didn't really enjoy those. And I got tired of traveling. I got tired of going, I would try to make every... And usually did. We had 26 zones, and I would manage to get to every zone at least once every other year. And visit them and counsel with them in person, not just over the phone.
Yeah.
So I really got tired of traveling, living out of a suitcase.
Yeah. No, I can understand that too.
In fact, I've only been in one airplane in the last 8 years.
And haven't missed it at all.
Not one bit, or a motel room. I have been a motel room because of automobile trips that we've taken, but nothing. The only time we've been out in an airplane is my mother-in-law died in 1983, and she wanted to be buried next to her husband in California. So my wife and I flew out there, took her out, and buried her in California. And that's the only plane I've been in. And I haven't missed it one bit.
What happened to the advertising budget over all those years, Burt?
Well, it skyrocketed. It went from, I'm trying to remember figures now. I want to say it went from something like 4 or 5 million a year to maybe 40 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, from what I read in the trade magazines and so forth, the Wall Street Journal and whatnot, they blow 50 million in one crack with McDonald's.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean blow it.
Yeah.
They blew that 55 million it cost them to have that promotion with McDonald's because they didn't get anything out of it.
How do you tell if you get anything out of that?
But what dealers tell you, by the traffic it generates, McDonald's didn't generate one bit of traffic.
Mm.
The dealer here told me, he says, the only people I saw come in were people who couldn't even buy a spare tire. They come in,
Mm-hmm.
take a test ride so they could get a free hamburger.
Right.
And he said, people who had the money to buy it, that there was no incentive
Yeah.
there.
It's the wrong kind of incentive for those folks.
For those people who could afford to buy an Oldsmobile. And what they do, they came back and threw another 25 billion right on top of it at McDonald's too. They've got to have their heads right up their rear end. They can't be doing any thinking. You ought to hear Buxton talk about it.
I can imagine. He's probably got some choice words for that.
Oh man.
Mm-hmm.
And the dealers couldn't believe what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the poor people in the zones have to try to sell the idea to the dealers it's a good deal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Beyond me.
With the, I'll call it the $4 million budget that we had way back when, was that still a talk to the dealers to see if that was doing the job?
Oh
sort
yeah,
of thing?
oh yeah. We had co-op advertising with the dealers. The dealers had spent, at that time too, every car that a dealer sold, he contributed, I don't remember, $30 or $35
Mm-hmm.
to his advertising fund, and we would contribute $35.
Okay.
And then that money had to be spent in his area of influence,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
whether it be in a weekly paper or whatever, but it went locally.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would tell us in Lansing what that advertising money was to go for.
Okay, so he would point it in the direction that
Yeah.
he felt it, whether it was TV at that
Yeah.
time.
Well, there
or
wasn't any TV.
That age, I guess, but
No,
cars.
there was radio.
Yeah.
It was either radio or newspaper
Or magazines.
or
perhaps.
magazine.
Yeah.
But we had the national ads and magazines.
Mhm.
But he, like in the local paper,
Mm-hmm.
if he put an ad in, that would have, he could apply that
Yeah.
against it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the dealer contribution was 30 or 35.
Did that process there change much over time? The mutual contribution, so to speak?
It's changed into what it is today.
Okay.
Yes, it changed. I think probably in the mid-'60s is when that was discontinued.
Okay.
I'm not sure of the year. I don't have a way of remembering.
But the dealer now is responsible for his own.
Well, the dealer has now, they contribute to a fund which is well, like the Central Florida Dealers have an association.
Mhm.
They contribute by each car they sell, and I don't know what the dollar amount is now, whether it's $100
Mhm.
a car or what. But it varies by
Sure.
geographic area of the country. Yes, but Central Florida dealers have a fund which they contribute to, and Oldsmobile contributes to. But it isn't a 50-50 deal like it was back
Mhm.
then.
Okay.
It can be anything that's determined between the two people.
It's kind of negotiated sort of thing?
Yeah.
Mhm. All right.
And then they can sell it, they can spend it in that area as they want with Oldsmobile's advertising approval.
Okay.
with our agency's
Mhm,
approval
mhm.
and Lansing's approval, they can spend it on TV ads or whatever. But those ads that they run locally, you see on TV, still has to be approved
Through the plant?
through Oldsmobile.
Mhm.
Sometimes you wonder, with all the approval that has to be gotten, how an ad ever gets into print
Mhm.
or on TV.
During when cars were in what I'll call real short supply in the 40s and the early 50s, selling cars must have been somewhat simpler than it was when we got into later years. I think a 58 must have been a terrible year.
It was.
And what did we do through all that sort of thing? Did we change any of our processes or the way we approached the thing?
Not really, because they say, well, why spend the advertising? Nobody's going to buy a car anyway. Why spend the money on advertising? But no one ever wanted to quit advertising. No one ever wanted to quit
Mhm.
having their name there.
Okay.
We wouldn't spend maybe as much,
All right.
but maybe we still had to advertise to
Would you
keep.
change the focus, maybe from newspapers to magazines, or
It went back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah.
No, there was no set. There's a policy for that particular year, up to unless it didn't work.
Mhm.
So then you try something else.
How about the focus groups that maybe you were trying to focus your sales against? I think of the people, upper level folks, or the beach bunch, or whatever you would call the various groups.
Oh, Oldsmobile has really been all over the lot with that thing
Mhm.
over the years. First we wanted the middle age or the
Yeah,
elderly,
yeah.
and then we wanted the groupies,
Right.
and then we wanted this and we wanted that. Then when we came out with the rocket engine in 1948, why,
Yeah.
it was the speed, and then we didn't have any speed, and then I mean, it's up and down,
Yeah.
up and down the lot.
What do you think maybe, Burt, was one of the most significant things that Oldsmobile did over all those years?
Hydromatic and the rocket engine.
Okay. Those were two.
The hydromatic was the first thing because we
Yeah.
had the first automatic transmission,
Right.
and the rocket engine because of the power it had at that time, and to get up and go.
Did the rocket promote people coming into the show?
Oh,
and
absolutely.
seeing cars?
Yes, it did.
Mhm.
We used to sell a plastic hood, clear plastic hood.
I remember seeing pictures of that.
Here,
Mhm.
we used to sell that
That was to the dealer sort of thing?
at the dealer, and then he'd put it on his demonstrator so that people could see, look down into it, and it had a light on it. You'd park it on the street,
Yeah.
turn that light on, and people would look down there and see your rocket engine.
Oh, yeah.
It had a big named rocket on both sides
Yeah,
of the engine.
Yeah.
Oldsmobile did a good job in promoting that rocket engine. Too good a job, it turned out to be.
Yeah, it did, yeah. Yeah, right.
But it still got Oldsmobile on the map.
Mhm.
Put Oldsmobile, I think, where it was today, or was 3 years ago.
So do you remember Air Ride?
Oh, do I remember Air Ride? Yes, I do. Anybody who was in the field during that 57 and 58 remember Air Ride. I can remember one night, never forget it. Our old friend Mr. Wolfram came to town in Buffalo, and he wanted to go to dinner that night with, over across on the Canadian side of the falls, the hotel there. I think it was I remember the Sheraton or the Statler,
Mm-hmm.
where it had their dining room was up high, and you could look down and see the falls at
Mhm,
night.
mhm.
It was in the wintertime when
Yeah.
the falls were frozen. Of course, he was staying over on the state side in Buffalo. Well, this was 1958. Vic Sutherland was the sales manager. Bill Buxton was service manager. Wolfram, Newt Barber was assistant sales manager. There was about 10 people from Lansing. And so I was the zone manager, so I took Wolfram and I think Vic Sutherland, the sales manager, in my car. So we had 6 or 7 cars carrying these people over to dinner. We had it all set up across Niagara River there, the hotel. We had a table right next to the windows where you could look out. Coming back, I had this 98 that had been gone over, I mean, perfect. The right rear bag went bang.
Oh, no.
You never heard anybody get such a chewing as I got from Wolfram that night.
Really?
Yes. Finally, I said to him, Mr. Wolfram, I didn't make this goddamn car. Oh, I mean, he was really chewing me out right there for driving it like that. And Mr. Wolfram, I didn't make this goddamn automobile. He said, well, yeah, then he was all right. But boy, he was loading, really loading into him because he didn't like to be inconvenienced at all.
Yeah.
So the guy that had the least rank from Lansing, they had to wait until we could get another car back, and we took Wolfram and them right on the hotel.
Of Burt Green of Ormond Beach, Florida, made on January 3rd, 1989 by Jim Walkinshaw of the Oldsmobile History Center. This is tape number 2 of 2 tapes.
Okay, back to the air ride. Was Mr. Wolfram kind of ornery like that generally, or?
Mr. Wolfram was a son of a bitch. And I think anybody who ever worked for him well, he said when he dies, he'll have a hard time getting somebody to carry his casket. And I think that's what happened too.
Really? Why was he so ornery?
Because he wanted to be. That was his nature. He was a little sawed-off shrimp who felt he had to tell everybody how important he was. And he's the only executive in General Motors that I ran into in the 40 years that was like that. The only one.
Isn't that interesting?
I worked while I was there was McEwen. From McEwen I went to Skinner. From Skinner to Wolfram. From Wolfram to Metzel. From Metzel to Howard Carroll. Howard Carroll, it went to, I forget the guy's name who came from Canada and he died of cancer.
That was Baker.
Baker.
Baker came after Belts, I think. I think Belts died and then
Yep,
Baker
that's
came.
right, that's right. Yep, yep. And
Bob Cook.
Bob Cook.
Yeah.
Every one of them was a gentleman except Wolfram. And Wolfram he would come to town and he would expect everybody, including the people who worked at the hotel, to really bow to him. He was entitled to it. He reminded me something of being a king, trying to be a king and didn't know how. And I think anybody who ever was exposed to him very close would tell you the same thing. He was a son of a bitch, all right.
Yeah.
He was bad news. Everybody hated the dealers. The dealers had no respect for him at all. I forget one announcement show. He had this idea, and any idea he had, it was it. His idea to put on the announcement show was to have this orchestra. And he was standing up there in front, reading his speech. And this time, speech went into the dealer organization, talking to the dealers. And he said, "You are like the violins." And this is another part of the orchestra, bringing those on. It was the most boring thing and the most stupid thing that anybody ever tried to do, or did do, that I know of, at an announcement meeting, trying to get dealers enthused about the new model they were going to have to sell for the following year.
Mm-hmm. I take it went over like a ton of lead bricks.
By the time he was through speaking, and he just went on and on and on. By the time he went through, we'd keep the lights down in the house until he got off the stage, so he wouldn't know that everybody walked out on him.
Oh, my Lord, really?
Yeah.
Oh, isn't that something?
Yeah.
Testimony to it.
But we would keep the house dark
Mm-hmm.
until he got off the stage.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom Hendy, who was a grand guy,
Yeah.
Tom Hendy said, "No, we got to keep these lights off until he gets on." People just walked out.
Yeah. How about C.L. McEwen? We don't know much about him.
I only knew him by name.
All right.
Everybody had the utmost respect for C.L. McEwen. He was general manager when I started,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, I was only 24 years old, but he, as I remember, Jim Barry and everybody had nothing but respect for C.L. McEwen. And Skinner, too. Skinner was tough.
Okay, tell me about Skinner.
Skinner was tough, but Skinner was fair.
Mm-hmm.
He could be really rough. But if he was rough, 9 times out of 10 you deserved it.
Okay.
I have one interesting thing to tell about Skinner. When I was near Transport Command during the war, it had to be in 45 because the war in Europe was over. No, it wasn't over either.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Paris. I had a flight into Paris, and I had read in Stars and Stripes for this commission, and I forget what Skinner's job was during the war with the government. Some kind of a commission, anyway. There's 5 or 6 of them. And I had read in Stars and Stripes, the Army newspaper, that this commission was coming, and I knew Skinner was on the commission. So I happened to be in Paris on a flight when that commission was arriving. And so I maneuvered through some people I knew there in the base in Paris, at Orly Field. I maneuvered so that I could go out to the plane and help carry their baggage in.
Oh, my.
And I made sure when I got out to the plane that I got Skinner's bag.
Oh, yes.
And so that I could, because he didn't know me. I knew his name, but he didn't know me, and I'd never met him.
Yeah.
And I introduced myself to Skinner. And I said, "Mr. Skinner, I'm an employee of Oldsmobile." And he turned around and he looked at me. He shook my hand, and he was a real gentleman about it.
Big smile.
Here I was a staff sergeant,
Yeah.
and here he is, a big wheel in the government.
Yeah.
But he stood there and he talked to me and said, "I hope you see your way clear to come back when the war is over."
Oh, that's great.
And so, of course, I liked him. I always felt that anybody who got chewed up by him deserved it, 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
There's one time I think he fired somebody that they didn't deserve. He was coming into Miami for the Motorama, and this district manager brought his car out to meet him, and Paul Sinclair and myself, Paul Sinclair was the regional manager and I was the assistant zone manager, were there. And this district manager drives up to the plane, and I guess it was our fault for not checking his car. Anyway, he's got a squirrel tail flying from the aerial in his car. For Skinner to ride in.
Mm-hmm.
Skinner reached up and he grabbed that goddamn squirrel tail like that, tore it down. We knew we were in for it. And he didn't say anything, though, in front of the district manager.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "I want that guy fired tomorrow."
Mm.
We
Oh,
did.
there.
He said, anybody has any more sense than that, I don't want him on my payroll.
Isn't that something?
I didn't think that was fair.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
that's the way he was.
Sometimes that happens.
Yeah, it happened. He was quite a guy.
See, who were your sales managers during that period of time?
Ralston was there when I started.
Did you have any dealings with him?
Yes, he was the one who was sales manager when I went to Lansing
Okay.
the first time.
What kind of a person was he?
Wonderful. Dealers loved him.
Did they?
The dealers thought he was God.
And why? Why was that?
Because of his personality, because of his being fair. And he told it as it was. He didn't lie to them.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just a wonderful man for that kind of a job.
Uh-huh.
Or any kind of a job, I
Yeah.
think. Dave Ralston, he was something else.
How about we're working with his employees and that sort of?
Everybody loved him.
Everybody did.
Everybody respected him.
Yeah.
Everybody didn't love him,
Yeah.
but everybody respected him,
Yeah.
which I think is very important.
How did he manage people? Or
He let them think they were managing themselves, but he knew what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
He knew people, and he respected people, and he respected people's feelings. Right after I first went to Lansing in 49 or 48, I had to have a hemorrhoid operation. I didn't know that he had had a hemorrhoid operation himself a couple of years before.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew how painful it was going to be. You know, he came down to my office. He was on the second or third floor there in old building 60.
Mm-hmm.
He came down to my office with a rubber tube,
A donut?
a donut,
Uh-huh.
for me to set on when I got. He says, because you're going to need it.
Isn't
And gave me
that-
his old donut.
Isn't that something? Yeah.
I think everybody
Uh-huh.
who knew or had occasion to be around Ralston liked him and respected him.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't help it. And we've had some good salesmen, and we've had some dillies.
Yeah. Who followed him?
G.R. Jones.
Okay. He was called G. Rocket Jones
Yeah.
for some reason?
Yeah.
Why did he get that name?
Because he was always selling rocket engines.
Okay.
And he was a grand guy, but he wasn't any Ralston. He had a lot of bullshit about him, but he was all right. He was a good salesman.
Uh-huh.
And
How did he manage that? Different than Ralston, I assume.
everybody manages
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah.
How do you tell anybody what was different about him?
Do the best you can.
Well,
did he manage by what I call consensus with people in meetings, or was it authoritarian? Get it out.
Well, no, neither one really. He was the manager, and you knew he was, and he expected you to know he was. But also, he treated you as a human being, and he would take. You could say something to him, and he would not chop your head off if he didn't agree with you.
Yeah, and he would listen to you.
Oh yes, he would definitely listen
Uh-huh.
to you. You could tell him. He'd listen to you about anything you wanted to say.
Okay. He might not use that or go that way.
Oh no.
Yeah.
No. But he would listen to you,
Mhm.
and you know he was listening to you.
Okay.
And as a consequence of that, you didn't talk to him about a lot of things that you shouldn't be talking to him
Sure.
about. I mean, trivial things.
Wasting his time, so
Yeah,
to speak.
yeah. He was a grand guy. Rick Sutherland, who followed him, was, yeah. And Mike Merring, who followed him, was an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard about Mike Merring, and probably, I don't know whether you knew him or not.
No, I did not know him. So.
You didn't miss anything. He was an absolute disaster. I don't know how Oldsmobile ever survived him.
Where did he come from?
He was assistant zone manager. He was his own manager in Los Angeles,
Oh, okay.
and for some reason or other, Wolfram liked him.
Huh.
Boy, oh boy. An alcoholic. Every other word was a curse word with him. Whether he was talking to a dealer or whether he was talking to an employee or who. He'd get drunk and wouldn't show up for meetings when he was on the road. You name it, he was in.
Bad.
Absolutely. I don't know how Oldsmobile ever survived it. The only reason they did it was because of Wolfram. Where Oldsmobile changed was when Wolfram had to retire
Mm-hmm.
and Metzel came in. Oldsmobile changed overnight. We had, nobody at Oldsmobile had any respect down at the corporation. We couldn't get anything done down there. Nobody would believe us on anything we said because of Wolfram and because of Mary. It was a hell of a period to go through, about a 3-year period, 2-year period there when it was hell. Believe me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but Metzel came in, changed overnight.
Mm.
Metzel was honest to begin with. He was fair. He knew what he was doing. He was one hell of a good engineer. And he was smart enough to listen to the sales manager, who was Buxton. And Buxton was one hell of a sales manager.
Mm-hmm.
Buxton was one hell of a guy. By far the best sales manager I think has ever was in the business. Maybe R.H. Grant. Old R.H. Grant from Chevrolet was better, but Buxton was good.
Were you in any of the, what I will call general managers get-togethers at that juncture, like between Wolfram and Metzel and so forth, where they would conduct meetings and ask for whatever input they received?
Oh yeah,
How did Metzel handle those things in contrast perhaps to Wolfram?
Metzel would give his address, but not in a way that was obnoxious.
Okay.
Wolfram was always obnoxious. He could say good morning to you and you'd be mad the rest of the day.
I don't know how a guy could do that.
I don't either. It's a mystery.
Mm.
But Metzel was entirely different and for the good. And Metzel was a good change for Oldsmobile.
Mm-hmm. And where did Buxton came up from?
Service.
From the service side of the house?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was always in service.
Uh-huh.
Grand guy and knew the business, and he worked hard with only having a high school education.
Yeah.
He was something else, and still is.
Yeah.
We still correspond and talk on the phone all the time. Always liked Bill.
How did Bill manage the organization, if it's describable?
I don't know how to describe Bill. He knew what he was talking about. He let everybody know that he knew what he was talking about without being obnoxious about letting them know that he knew what he was talking about. Now, is that a description?
Well, yeah, to some degree. Yeah.
He was a different kind of a person than any of the other sales managers were.
Was he a salesman sort of person?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. He was a good salesman. He was a good manager of people. He knew people. If they were doing something wrong, he didn't hesitate to tell them and tell them why,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that they should be able to understand. If they didn't understand, it was their own fault.
Mm-hmm. And he was fair with folks.
Absolutely. He couldn't have been any fairer with people than he was.
Mm-hmm.
I knew Bill through the business, but he also became very good personal friends. Mm-hmm. But I can truthfully say I never felt, or never did I ask for any favors because of our personal
Mm-hmm.
relationship of our wives or him. That I never infringed upon. There was a boundary there.
Sure. And it didn't cross over.
Never crossed over. Never did. And since I retired, and of course he retired before I did,
Mm-hmm.
but he retired from the corporation, but we became even faster friends.
Sure.
And our wives were too.
See, when he left, who came in?
When Buxton, Jim Maddox.
Maddox, yes.
Jim Maddox. Jim Maddox was good too,
Mm-hmm.
but he wasn't any Buxton.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Dan Quill's
Right.
nothing. No, Jim was good too. And of course, he was sales manager then until I left.
Mm-hmm.
While I was there, we had more general managers than we had sales managers.
Yeah. How about Belts?
Belts was terrific. Belts was a good general manager. He was somewhat crude in his language, but he didn't mean any of it. I'll give you what, I'm sure you won't want to use this. We had our, will Helen be listening to this? I don't,
She may or may not. I know, honestly, we're going to have so many of these things, I'm sure we're not going to be able to listen to each other.
Well,
so.
it's maybe a little bit off color, but
that's okay.
She understands. I mean, she'd probably get a kick out of it too, and I know her well enough anyway. But anyway, we had this new car announcement show for the whole country. It was in Las Vegas, 1970, and so I was more or less, I was in charge of the ground arrangements in Las Vegas, in charge of housing all the people in Las Vegas, and in charge of the entertainment and so on and so forth. So I was pretty busy.
You sure were.
And I was there for a week before they started coming in. I was there for 4 days after, so I was there for a total of 2 weeks in Las Vegas, which is 1 day shy of 2 weeks too long. 1 day is enough, but 2 weeks is that's nobody should ever have to do that. And I haven't been back to Las Vegas since, and I've never gone back. But anyway, what was I going to tell you?
You were in charge of all the details.
Yeah. Many things happened out there. I had one particular story I was going to tell you about Las Vegas. Right now I can't remember.
Okay,
Maybe
that's
I will.
all right.
But, oh, I know what it was. When Belts and Buxton came out on a GM plane to Las Vegas. Have you ever been there?
Once.
Caesar's Palace?
We just went through. That's all.
Okay, you know what the outside.
I know the strip. Yeah.
Okay, you know what the outside of Caesar's Palace looked like. Well, Buxton and Belts, we had beautiful suites for them at Caesar's Palace. Belts had never been to Las Vegas before. Buxton had. Buxton and I were out there 3 times before that, making the arrangements and finalizing the contracts and all that with people in Las Vegas. And so I was driving the car with Belts and his wife and Buxton and his wife from the airport to the hotel. Belts was sitting in front with me, and Adria, and Belts' wife, and Bill were in the back seat. As we drive up to the door at Caesar's Palace, there are these men there with nothing on.
Nothing on at all.
And John looks at it, he points to one of them, he says, "Lowenstein, look at that. Aren't you proud of me?"
How about that?
I laughed, of course, because Belts belonged to Wallace Hills, which I did too. I knew him personally, but not as well as we knew Buxton.
Yeah.
Because Buxton, we became real close. But I knew Belts well enough. He was John and I was Burt. And we've been on some weekends together up north. But I thought I'd die that day. Lowenstein, aren't you proud of me?
Did she laugh?
Yeah. Of course she laughed. She was a grand person too. I always liked Lowenstein. And Adria Buxton, of course, they didn't come any better than she was. Good.
See, there's one other manager. Let's see, Howard Carroll. We didn't talk about him.
Howard never made a decision in his life.
How did he get to the corporation?
By not making a decision, I guess, because
Can't
that's
make a
his
mistake.
only qualification. God. Howard Carroll was all right, except he didn't know what the hell he was doing when he was running a sales department. That's the only thing I guess he was a good engineer.
You have to look at it from that side.
That's the only side I can look at it from. But kind of a person I know he was when we first came out with the Omega. And none of us felt really that the Omega was going to set the world on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And we felt that we had to have some advertising money for the Omega, extra. We wanted like $1 million extra advertising money to advertise the Omega and put it so people would know we had something. And Howard Carroll was general manager. He agreed. Like, we're going to fight for this. I forget who the executive in charge of the car divisions was in Detroit, but they used to come to Lansing each year to review your budget for the ensuing year. And so this guy came, he was rotund, eating too much. And Buxton makes this pitch. Carroll, all of us are sitting around the table. Who was the comptroller then?
Would that have been either Vogt or Elliott?
Dick Elliott, all sitting around the table. So Buxton makes this pitch for the $1 million. And so, extra. So, gets all through the presentation. It was all done with Buxton just sitting down and talking. But this executive of the corporation is walking around the table all the time and listening. I'll never forget, he had a toothpick in his mouth, too. Working this toothpick around and listening. Buxton gets through and he says, Bill, that was one of the best presentations I've ever heard. He says, you really made it sound good. But he says, we ain't got the money, so scrap it.
That quick? Huh?
Yeah, just like that. Howard Carroll says, I agree. He said, we don't need it.
No support.
None whatsoever. If Howard Carroll had opened his mouth and said anything, he would never support you on anything like that. If somebody at the corporate level who was above him said jump, he'd jump. That is the way a general manager can run. Belch's office one day, and when we had cars sticking out of rear, and we had 20-some thousand cars sitting on dealers' lots or around fairgrounds where we could find space, and every dealer had all the cars he could handle. And we had to spread all over the country, 20-some thousand cars. And they're all eating up not only a lot of money, but they're deteriorating. So you put them in on frozen ground, take them off hog ground, mud and everything else. And so, I forget who this executive was. Oh, it was Murphy, when Murphy was over the car division. And Murphy called Belton, chewing him out about the stock we had. Of course, Big and Pontiac and Charlie had as many, we knew that. But I happened to be in Belton's office, and Murphy called. I got up to him, Belton said, no, sit there, Burt. So I did. And Murphy got all through chewing him out, and Belton had him on the speakerphone. He said, well, God damn it, Murphy, what do you want me to do? Grind them up and put them on my cereal for breakfast? That was the end of the conversation.
Phelps was kind of pragmatic.
Yes. And I'm sure Jerry heard a lot of words she never had heard before.
But she did too.
I know she did.
Yeah.
There was only one Belt, but the dealers loved him, and the press really thought he was great. He had the press wrapped around his little finger.
Isn't that interesting?
With the announcement show in Detroit one year, we didn't have anything new on the car at all. Belts was his newspaper writer. This was the press reception. He called him over and he says, come here, I want to show you something. You see that outlet there? He said, yeah. He said, that's air conditioning. He said, you know what we're going to call that? We're going to call that the crotch cooler.
I remember when he put those on too.
But he could do that with the press, and they loved him for it. So we ain't got anything. We got a crotch cooler. You want to hear one funny story?
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Burt.
Remember Fritz Bennett?
Sure.
Right, did you know him?
Oh, yeah, very well.
Did you?
Yeah.
Real well?
Well, I mean, not personally, but I through the plant very well, yeah.
Oh.
Worked with him quite close.
You know, he didn't know very much.
I know.
Okay, as long as you understand
Yeah.
that. He couldn't pour piss out of the blue with directions on the heel. And he'd fuck up a 3-car funeral. He'd get the goddamn hearse in front of the car, the family in front of the hearse. Anyway, going to have his press conference, going to have at the Detroit Yacht Club to show the new cars to the press, pre the dealer announcement. So we have him staying at the Statler, I guess it was at that time. I don't know, it was one of the downtown Detroit hotels. No, it was the newer hotel down there, which down there near the river. Wasn't the big
Not the
tall.
Renaissance.
No,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
the other one. Anyway, this was before the Renaissance. Anyway, they had them all at the hotel and so to go to lunch and have cocktails and lunch out at the yacht club. Cook was general manager.
Okay.
And so, I don't remember if it was the Detroit Yacht Club or Grosse Pointe Yacht Club. I forget now which was which. Anyway, Fritz gets him in the bus, takes him to the Detroit Yacht Club. The press conference was at the Grosse Pointe Yacht Club.
God, wrong place. Who was embarrassed?
Fritz wasn't.
He wasn't.
Didn't bother him any. Anyway, I wasn't there seeing what Fritz was, but I was out at the Grosse Pointe Yacht Club. It was one way or the other. I don't remember
backwards
which way.
anyway, the wrong place.
He used the wrong place. Never forget Cook. Where in the hell are they? Where in the hell are they? 'Cause got this big buffet set up out there, the
everybody's-
bar set up,
nobody's
waiting for him.
showing up.
Nobody's showing up. Finally, Fritz calls. Said, "Boss, we're at the wrong place."
Oh, no.
Yeah.
You start back when Trixie calls up, if you would.
Cook says, "Good." Slammed down the phone. He said, "Let's go to Lansing."
Really?
Yeah.
Everybody
I mean, it was so late by that time.
Yeah.
The food was cold, spoiled, whatever. Cook didn't fire him. Why?
No.
Nobody will ever understand why he didn't fire Fritz. Because Fritz was, when Fritz would be on a trip with him, like Las Vegas, we always assigned one person to take care of Fritz and keep him out of our hair. Because we didn't want to have anything to do with Fritz, because if he got mixed up with it, he'd screw the goddamn thing up. He'd screw the whole detail up. We'd have a convention like down at Doral, and we'd always keep somebody with Fritz so that he didn't screw up the details. Because he thought, because he was from Lansing, and he was working directly for the general manager, that he could do all this directing.
Yeah.
Well, we'd say, "That's good, Fritz, we'll do that, Fritz." Never do a goddamn thing he said.
Yeah, everybody has a different approach. Isn't that the truth?
Well, he had a different approach, all right, but some reason or other, Belts liked him, and no one could ever figure that out.
Well, Fritzie is a likable person, if you talk with him.
Yeah, but Belts must have known
Yeah.
what he was not capable. The flightiest guy, one of the flightiest guys I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Anyway,
See, how about, you mentioned Motoramas and those kinds of things,
Yeah.
Burt. What did we do in that arena?
Motorama was a show like similar to, but on a bigger scale than what General Motors had last year. That big show that they had
Yes,
to
in New
show what
York.
their future was going
Yeah,
to be in
right.
New York, and then they took it to different cities. The Motorama was the same type of a thing, only it was on current models. It was sell current models, not something in the future, and it was for the public.
Okay.
And they always had it,
Hello.
hi,
Hi.
and they always, I was in the Atlanta zone, and we had 2 of them in Miami. At that time, Miami was part of the Atlanta zone. We didn't have a zone in Jacksonville.
Oh, okay.
And so the Atlanta zone covered
Mm-hmm.
that whole southeastern part of the United States practically. We went from Tennessee to Key West. We went from Mobile, Alabama to Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Just took in this whole area.
Yeah.
With all its geography out of the Atlanta zone. As a consequence, when they had the Motorama Miami, the Atlanta zone would have to take care of the details of housing, the transportation, and so forth for the executives from Lansing.
Okay.
And we also had to man the Motorama itself, the Oldsmobile exhibit at the Motorama. But those Motoramas, they were big. And they always had it in the Dinner Key Auditorium. And they would have these displays that would take them 10 days to set the thing up. And take them 4 days to tear it down, to ship on someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
It was all
It was
knocked down.
a moving thing that
Yeah.
we sent around the country.
Yeah. They opened in New York, and then from New York they go to Miami, maybe from Miami to Chicago, and Chicago to LA. They usually had it in those 4 places.
And it was all General Motors products.
Oh yeah, just General Motors, and I mean, it was a big operation. And I was, in as much as I was the assistant zone manager, I'm the one that got the details there for handling the housing and the transportation and so forth for the people when they were in Miami, as well as manning the Oldsmobile exhibit. And we would call in the other zones, because we'd have to have, while the exhibit was open, we'd have to have 4 or 5 people from Oldsmobile manning our exhibit for when the public was coming through.
Kind of knowledgeable people
Yeah.
that could
Explain our product
talk.
and so forth,
Yeah.
talk about the product and so forth. In addition to the dancing girls that they had and all that crap.
Right.
So.
Now, were those in addition to announcement shows?
Oh yeah, definitely. This was corporation, corporate, something like corporation. They only did it, I think, it was either 2 or maybe 3 years, maybe only 2. I don't remember for sure. I know the 2 years that I was in Atlanta in the winter, like right now, the latter part of January, when they would have it in Miami, that's when I would be down there for maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time, just doing that, doing nothing but working on that. And then we would always have executive cars, brass sack cars for not only the people from Lansing, but also people from the corporation. And that was always the job, rounding up those cars after it was over.
Ever have any get lost?
Yeah. Had one drown.
A car?
Yeah.
Oh, gracious sakes.
Car was assigned to a guy from the corporation. And evidently, well, I know what happened to it. We got this call, and the police had it. It was in the ocean. Evidently, he just left it in the ocean.
You mean he just drove
He drove it on the beach, and the tide
came in and got it?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness gracious sakes.
Of course, that car was scrapped.
I can imagine.
That's the only one we ever really lost.
Yeah.
We have come close.
Yeah.
We had some guys that maybe got married for a night or something like that and leave the car. But anyway.
The announcement shows, Burt, that they went out to all the zones too and wandered around?
Not to...
Or was that an in-house back in Lansing?
No, it was, they went to the zones. Depends upon the format for it. When I first started, they went to every zone, but it wasn't a big show as such.
Okay.
It was not like they have today or anything.
Yeah.
It was a presentation type of deal done in a theater type atmosphere.
All right.
With one car on display there at that theater. That was all. But then it developed into a show when Skinner was general manager, and after the war, into somewhat like a musical show.
Okay, so that's where those started to come to pass?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. And Wolfram really expanded upon it because he thought that was a great idea. He got show business. He thought show business was wonderful. And so that's where that idea was started, and as a consequence, most of the other divisions of the corporation follow the same format.
Mm-hmm.
And the show was usually in an area like New York, Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, and L.A.
The main population
Yeah,
centers.
well, where you get transportation into those
Yeah.
centers.
Yeah.
And they were always successful. I think they've run their course, though. From the last one I saw, it seemed to me like it was the same one with the just different faces with them. And the dealers are really not going for something like that anymore.
Were those good things at the time when we were doing those in the
you better believe
50s and
yes,
40s?
sir. They'd
People-
get the dealers enthused,
Yeah.
and that was the purpose of them, was to
Mhm.
get the dealers enthused over
Mhm.
the product they were going to have to sell. And it would last maybe 6 weeks or something like that anyway.
Yeah.
But at least it was a start, trying to get a start on
Yeah.
it right.
Yeah.
Of course, our announcements at that time were a lot different than they are today, too. Today it's just a rolling announcement.
Mm.
There isn't an announcement
Yeah.
as a certain day you
Yeah.
get to see the car.
Yeah.
You always see the cars now from the time they start coming
Sure.
off the line.
Sure.
Which I think the old way was a way of generating not only enthusiasm in your own dealer organization, because it gave you an opportunity once a year to get your dealers to clean up their places of business,
Mhm.
put out flags, let everybody know your business, put in special advertising in the newspaper, and to get you really enthused about selling the car for the next year.
And you kind of kept them secret a little bit.
Oh, yes, sir. Better believe we did. And we would give a dealer hell if he showed that car
Mhm.
beforehand.
Mhm.
Yeah. But that went out of the window 20 years
Yeah,
ago.
quite a while ago. Yeah.
But I still think that was a good idea.
Mhm.
I don't think it could be done today, because once you've broken away from it, I don't think you can go back.
Yeah.
And you sold dealers promotional materials. They would send out announcements to their customers, or hope to be customers, to come in and see the new car. They'd have teaser pictures on the invitation, And it generated one hell of a lot of enthusiasm. It really did.
What did we do from a zone standpoint with dealers that were? You must have always had dealers that people were grumbling about this, that, and the other thing.
Oh, yes. Try to counsel with them.
Was it that sort of approach?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Counsel with them, show them, try to improve. That was the reason for having a zone, one of the reasons for having a zone.
Mhm.
Try to get them to improve. Some you
Well, in
could
the
work
case
with.
of firing them, so to speak.
Oh, you used to be able to cancel a dealer a lot better than you can cancel one today.
I see.
I'll just cite you something that just happened. I had to go to Tampa to pick up this car
Mhm.
because the district manager over in Tampa was driving it. So I went over to Tampa to pick it up. And Jim Furman is the dealer in Tampa. Well, I knew Jim Furman back when I was assistant zone manager in Atlanta, which was in 1953 and 1954.
Mhm.
And Jim Furman was a young man, and so was I. Because that's a long time ago. Anyway, when I went over, pick it up, the car up, I got there about 8 o'clock in the morning, and took a cab out to the dealership. And I was in a dealer, but the sales manager was having his morning meeting when I walked in. And so I told the girl at the reception desk who I was and who I wanted to see, who was the sales manager, to pick up the car. And she said, well, the meeting will probably last another 15 or 20 minutes. You just make yourself at home with coffee there and so forth. So I did. And in walks this older gentleman. I thought it was Jim Furman, but I wasn't sure. And because I hadn't seen Jim Furman in 25 years, at least. And so after he walked on through and walked back the corridor to his group of offices, I asked the girl, I said, was that Mr. Jim Furman? She said, oh, yes, I'm Mr. Furman. I said, do you suppose, and I told her then a little bit more about myself. I said, do you suppose I could see him? She said, sure, go right on back. So I walked back, and the door was open. I knocked on the door like that, and he looked up. He says, Burt Green, where the hell you been?
After 20-some years?
Yeah.
My goodness. And he didn't see you in the lobby, apparently. Hadn't I?
No, he probably saw somebody standing there, but didn't pay
Didn't
attention.
recognize you,
Didn't
yeah.
pay attention.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
Yeah. And so we had quite a conversation, and we remembered Paul Sinclair, who was the regional manager at that time. And Paul, he was a man of few words. He liked everybody. And he didn't like to have to give anybody hell. Jim Furman told me this when I was over there in November. He said, we were reminiscing about some things that happened. He said, I'll have to tell you about Paul Sinclair. And I said, I know a lot of things about Paul Sinclair. He says, I know you do, and so do I. He said, Oldsmobile came out with this program, which was a must program for every dealer. And he says, I remember what the program was, too. He said, we had to sign this piece of paper here saying that we were going to be honest in our dealings with customers. He says, I had never been anything but honest with customers, and it'd be damned if I was going to sign a paper saying it would be. I just both next to it, wasn't going to say it. Wasn't going to sign it.
Mm-hmm.
So he said it went along for about a month, and I'd get a call every day or so from somebody, and finally the zone manager. Finally, Paul Sinclair calls. And Paul starts out in his usual slow southern way of how's the weather and so forth. And I said, well, Paul, get to the point. What do you want? Paul said, well, he says, the boys in the zone tell me that you won't sign this paper. But I don't remember the exact word, but that was the gist of what it meant. He said, no, Paul, he says, I'm not going to. Paul said, well, why not? He says, because, Paul, he says, I've always been honest in my dealings with customers. He says, I can expect to continue to be, but I'm not going to sign any paper saying that. Paul said, well, now, Jim, let's talk about that for a minute. He says, you are going to sign it. Jim Furman says, no. He says, I'm not going to sign it. He said, well, Jim, let me tell you one thing. He says, the guy who's the Oldsmobile dealer tomorrow in Tampa, Florida is going to sign it.
Uh-oh.
Or he ain't going to be the dealer.
Mm-hmm.
Jim said, I changed my mind.
Right there.
You signed it. Paul never told me that story.
Yeah.
I'm sure it happened just that way, too. Because that's just the way Paul worked.
Yeah.
Remember one time we coming through, we flew from Atlanta to Jacksonville, and then we picked up a car in Jacksonville, and then we were going to come down the East Coast and come back to the West Coast, be gone for 2 weeks. And Paul liked to take trips like that because he got to sit and talk with the dealers, which was, it was good. He had excellent dealer relations. We stopped at the dealership in St. Augustine. He's still the dealer there, by the way. And we go in the dealership, and it was filthy.
Oh, goodness.
Shop was filthy. Showroom hadn't been swept out.
No.
It was about almost noon. And Paul said, Jim, he says, is your wife at home? I said, yeah. He says, I'm sure she is. He says, how would you like to have some company for lunch? I said, I think she'd like it. All right, Paul. He said, let's go out to your house and have lunch. This is unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And so we go out to the house for lunch. Paul, we go in the house, and he said, sit down, we had the lunch. Paul said, you've got quite a nice house here. He said, yeah, we're real proud of it. It's over on the ocean. And he said, we're quite proud of it. Paul said, mind if we look at it? No. all through the whole house. 3 or 4 bedrooms, right on the ocean, beautiful view. And he says to Paul, finally, he said, that's kind of an unusual request. You had to come out here for lunch. He said, "Do you have anything in mind?" He said, "Yeah, really did have." He said, "I just wanted to see if you live in a shit house like you work in."
Did that fix it?
We went on. That's all Paul said. We went on down to, came to Daytona Beach, then we went on down to West Palm Beach and came back through St. Augustine. Stopped in St. Augustine. Never saw a cleaner dealership in your life.
Oh, Peter. You did it.
Sure you did.
Uh-huh.
That's all it took.
Huh?
I just wanted to see if you lived in a shit house like you work in.
Yeah.
Just exactly that way too from his wife.
Oh, goodness.
he was quite a character. Quite a guy. Well, I've known some good ones and I've known some that weren't so good.
Yeah.
But I had a good time working up until the last 3 or 4 years I worked.
But by and large, isn't it 95% of them are good and the 5% aren't so good?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's the same percentage there as
Yeah.
it is everywhere.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Made a lot of good friends in Oldsmobile. A lot of them are gone.
Well, that's one thing we all get to share.
Yeah. Ernie Ballard, who was zone manager for years in Jacksonville, he retired 5 years ago, and he's dying of cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Maddox is dying of cancer.
Yeah, I heard that.
And Ernie, I talked to him in the hospital just before you came. And he's cheerful.
Yeah.
He's upbeat.
It's good that he can keep his,
Yeah. He's
because
been in
we
the
should
hospital
get,
now for 2 weeks. They finally found, what was the reason he had to go back to the hospital. Now they're giving him blood transfusions now. He's got for a long. And he had a urinary tract infection, which they finally found out what it was. He's been in there since he went back in the hospital the day after Christmas, supposedly for 1 day, and he's still there. I said, Ernie, I told you always keep that goddamn thing in your pants where it belongs instead of out where it can get infected. And he laughed. And so, at least I know I was able to make him laugh.
Yeah.
I know him well enough where I could talk to him. We're very good friends. He came to work for us when I was first in Lansing. He came just a graduate of Ohio State College graduate in training. So we've stayed friends throughout all the years. So.
That's good, Burt. Any other incidences you'd like to share, or?
Well, there's some I could share, but I don't think I better.
Well, I know there are always those kind too.
So.
Because we've had a pretty far-ranging discussion here. It's covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
A lot of time.
Yeah, we had some fellows who weren't so good. Newt Barber was different. I'm sure Helen will remember him. Newt Barber. I don't know if you
I
ever...
remember the name, is all.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't put a face with it.
Well, he was different. Everybody was different, but he was really different too.
What was he? What did he do?
He was assistant sales manager
Assistant sales
under
manager.
Jones.
Under Jones, okay.
Yeah.
What made him different?
Loud, blustery, getting mixed up in his speeches like Reagan.
Oh, he got too old again.
No, he wasn't that old either.
Oh.
One time he came to Atlanta, and he'd been in New York the day before for this meeting.
Yeah.
He came to Atlanta, and it was a regional meeting. Dealers from all over the South, Miami, all this whole area. He's really, and Barber was a spellbinder on his feet. He could really hold your attention.
Yeah.
He was really going to make this point. And we're going to take, he's talking about Buick, bucktooth Buick, they called it at that time.
With all of the teeth in the
Yeah,
back.
yeah. And we're going to take him just like Grant took Richmond. There's a deathly silence.
Because he's in the wrong place.
It went over big in New York.
Oh, yeah.
After it was over, he says, what in the world happened then? Well, it said that. I said, well, no, God damn it, you're in the South, not the North.
Yeah, right.
I said, the people down here aren't proud the Grant took Richmond. Oh!
Must be he didn't have a speechwriter or something.
He had a speechwriter, but he never talked from script.
Oh.
He talked off the cuff.
Oh.
He didn't believe in the script.
Oh, yeah.
And on a presentation where you more or less had supposed to follow a script along with
Yeah,
the
so the
slide.
slides can click, yeah.
Oh, Jesus Christ. He gets so mixed up in those things, it was pathetic.
The poor guy in the back room must have gone nuts.
Well, he did, but we didn't have a back room in a lot of those meetings.
Yeah.
We just was sitting there.
Yeah.
But it was, but the dealers liked him.
Yeah.
That was the main thing.
Yeah.
They knew he didn't know what he was talking about or anything. But so what? He was a nice guy.
Still charged the job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was good. He was all right.
Yeah.
I'll never forget the time when that plane went down in Denver. Jim Stroud and Carl East on it.
Yeah.
I was just being transferred from Atlanta to Buffalo. And I was at home, and the next morning I was leaving for Buffalo. About midnight, Paul Sinclair called me. Paul lived just up the street from where we did. And Paul said, got bad news for you, Burt. And I said, what's that? He says, Carl East and Jim Stroud just went down out of Denver. They just called him and told him. He knew I was leaving the next morning. But it never bothered me any as far as me getting on a plane in Atlanta and going, but it was a sad time.
Well, is that enough?
I can't really think of any more. Paul covered some of the high points,
Great job.
none of the low points.
Yeah, that's all right. 50 years from now, somebody's going to chuckle. They may chuckle next year, too.
I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway.
Well, that's good, Burt. Really, both Helen and I appreciate it. Even though Helen couldn't be here, I know she wanted to say hi. So.
Well, I'd say hi to her. I always liked Helen.
Well, I will shut this baby off.
Okay. The tape verse should be about